Good evening. I'm Mike Steagall, and tonight I'm joined by David Christie, my colleague from the Policy Committee, and Benjamin Denniston from the Basement team. And under the circumstances of the latest Basement Project report, the Nuclear Nawapa 21, a gateway to the fusion economy, we thought it'd be useful to have an elaboration, more of a discussion between the Policy Committee and the Basement as part of an ongoing approach to give the population in general, as well as the members of Congress and the institutions of our country, a sense of why this policy is so important and also what the policy is. It's clear right now to most Americans that we are in a dire crisis. The crisis is clear because the Obama presidency is bankrupt. It has put itself an aggressive policy towards World War III, and they are now exposed to most of the American population. It is also true that the financial system globally is bankrupt, and these financial institutions behind Obama are clearly panicked and pushing Obama and his administration towards a World War III policy. These institutions, the financial ones, are largely responsible and beholden to a policy coming directly from the British monarchy and the Queen of England, a renowned policy of population reduction, which would largely reduce this population on the planet from the current 7 billion to less than 1. This is the current political and economic crisis, and the system that has brought us to this point must be changed. But there is a larger problem. The location that we reside in the universe itself, our solar system, our galaxy, and even beyond, is presenting right now the human species with a much broader and more scientific challenge. That is a question of asteroids. It is a question of climate change. It is really a question of what is the human species within the universe today. And this policy and our program are meant to address both of these fundamental crises facing us today. So Ben, you had a chance to have a discussion with Mr. LaRouche earlier, which laid out some of the things that have now come to bear recently regarding climate change and the broader questions of planetary defense. Perhaps you can kind of give us an insight there and we can see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as you just laid out, the crisis really is a crisis of what mankind really is. We're in this total... there's a certain level of absurdity in the whole thing I think it's worth pointing out. I mean, here we are facing off with a potential thermonuclear World War III. And as Mr. LaRouche has made the point, and many people obviously understand at this point, war at this point is, the self-extinction of the human species. But then if you look back just in February of this year, what'd you have? This meteorite impact, right? This big asteroid impact over Russia. Who saw that coming? Right? Did we see that coming? No. Did Russia see that coming? No. Did Europe, did the British see that coming? No. So it's kind of a useful wake-up call as to what the hell we're doing on this planet. I mean, we're sitting here squabbling over these ridiculous, if you look at it from the larger picture, frankly, ridiculous imperial oligarchical fights, when there's a much bigger challenge before mankind. What are we doing in the solar system? Right now, we don't even, Mr. LaRouche was really emphasizing this earlier today, we don't even know where most of these asteroids are. Like, we have understanding of far less than 1% of even the immediate asteroids near the Earth's orbit in the inner part of the solar system. So we're basically, flying blind through this area with literally millions of these bodies floating around. And where's the serious discussion and policy of what is mankind going to do to rise to the challenge of actually defending the planet, defending these things? So, we're really coming to the point where as the economic system's breaking down and the entire framework around that, it's really forcing the question of what do we need to replace it with? And as you mentioned, as you said, I think really it has to go to a conception of what is mankind's role need to be in the universe? What does mankind's intended role need to be in the scientific sense? And then how do we shape policy and shape international relations around making that real? How do we take a scientific conception of where mankind should go? What should the future be? And how do we begin to shape policy around that conception? So I think that's the challenge before us. I think we have an immense opportunity now, and that's what Mr. LaRouche is really pushing us to do with this report was to lay out the future. What does the future for mankind need to be in response to this breakdown crisis? And that's what we have presented in this report, is an initial presentation of the scope of what the next 2 to 3 generations can bring in terms of creating a new state for mankind on this planet.
Well, just to add to that, we're at a point now where the paradigm that was brought in with the death of Kennedy, the environmentalism, the monetarism, which really in the end are part of the same philosophical conception. They all both have at the root of it that man isn't different than the beast, just simply pursuing pleasure, avoiding pain, and that's what defines our characteristics. And the higher domain of creativity that defined the Kennedy, which was the World War II generation, but it was under the leadership of Kennedy, you saw the commitment to the future through the space program, through what this report lays out around the various, NWAPA obviously is a Kennedy project, the nuclear power desalination facilities for the coast and to clean up the interior river systems of our country. And you saw that commitment with his death and the bringing in of this paradigm shift towards monetarism and environmentalism. We've now come essentially to the end of that paradigm. And what we're faced with is to continue with that paradigm means, and a commitment to those, those policies, means there is going to have to be population reduction, and this is what obviously the monarchy and the European banking and establishment is committed to doing, and that's where this war drive comes from, and explicitly a reaction to the fact that we've created a juggernaut for the other policy, beginning with Glass-Steagall, of wiping out the speculative financial activity to open a credit system so that we can develop these kind of projects again. And what I would say is this, because the American people are beginning to wake up right now. There's around the war danger. They see that this war is yet another war on weapons of mass destruction, and a war that, getting the sense that this thing could go to World War III. But you don't simply stop the war. You have to win the peace. And the way you win the peace is through this kind of economic development. And that's, that's in contrast to the economic side of the encirclement of Asia right now, because you have the military component, which is the air-sea battle, and then you have this Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, I'm all for Vietnam and Peru being offered economic advantage and so forth. But how is Obama calling the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trans-Pacific when it doesn't include Russia, China, and India? 2.5 billion people or more, actually, by the time you throw Russia in. So it's a fraud. It's designed for supranational dictatorship of destroying the sovereignty of nations. In fact, under the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Glass-Steagall would be outlawed because sovereign nations would not even be able to enact banking law that would conflict with the international bank's ability to do business in companies. So, but that's the economic encirclement. And you look at what we're proposing, this is the way out, is a partnership, and that partnership based on a relationship with Russia, China, and India first and foremost, and then obviously Japan and Korea, and you open up a new era of development. So I would like to just throw out one thing, and I don't know, maybe you guys have some comments on it, but that one of the things that is going to have to be dealt with is we must have this kind of cooperation as sovereign nations. Now, up until now, sovereign nations have been able to develop under the control of the empire, the forces of the British Empire, the Anglo-Dutch Empire, as it really is historically, through protectionist measures. And there's always been an idea that we have to protect ourselves. But once we overthrow the oligarchy and the grip of it, you have to have a somewhat different conception of how sovereign nations relate to each other. And one of the things that immediately comes up is the question of technology and technology sharing. And Mr. LaRouche has made the point that we don't necessarily want to bring the auto industry as we once had it back. We want to use the machine tool component of the auto industry in the plant and equipment and all that, but to push now the new frontiers around nuclear capabilities, particularly a science driver program towards fusion. But then that brings up the question of how do you actually, what are the roles that these other nations in Asia are going to play in terms of the economy? How do we cooperate and so forth? And maybe this is where some of the stuff around the strategic defense of the earth comes up, where nations can come together around the front edge science driver programs, but the question of technology sharing is going to be important, and I'm not quite sure what the solution is on that, but I would just throw that out for the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think it starts from the concept of what is a stage of progress we want to complete. You take this Pacific Basin territory. You have the United States, you have Mexico, the United States, and Canada, all with Pacific coastal regions and the whole rest of the continent. You have up to Alaska, you have this Bering Strait connection. You have this tiny gap separating the entire North American landmass and the entire Eurasian landmass. That can be bridged with the set of tunnels. It's been investigated for many decades doing this, actually linking these land masses. And that brings you right down into these regions of Russia, China, South Korea, Japan, where you do have nations that want to progress. They want to move. All this crap about no nuclear power, fission, we'll just give it a couple $100 million. We'll give AIG billions and billions of dollars, and we'll give a couple million for, this thing that could revolutionize mankind's relationship to the universe, fusion power. It's just absurd. The amount of money they're giving to these other, even just the green scams, compared to what fusion gets. So you have these nations that want to progress. You have this potential alliance. So what we took up in this report under Mr. LaRouche's emphasis is start with a 4-generation perspective. Start with this whole century. Break this century into a series of 4 generations. Now, what do you want this region to look like 2 generations from now? Bering Strait connection, maglev rail, magnetic levitation trains. You can go hundreds of miles per hour on these magnetic cushions. You can go over much steeper terrain. You can go much faster. You can handle harsher weather conditions. Just a superior technology. We should be implementing this en masse. You have huge resource bases in the Arctic that could be accessed and developed with high technologies. You have the whole prospect of real fusion technologies, not for power, for frankly, nearly unlimited power with fusion power, but also for all kinds of things like processing materials, reprocessing waste. So I think you have to start from, again, Mr. LaRouche is always emphasizing to start from the future back. What is the physical state that we want to create, that mankind wants to create? A new level of productivity per person, a new level of living standards for your population. And then now you have a framework in which you have that sketched out, and we can sketch out the path to get there. What are the stages required to get there? Can't do it all right away, especially in the crisis we're in now. It's going to take a couple years just to kind of get our feet and get the situation stabilized. Once you have this map, in a sense, it might be a dynamic map. It might change as you go, but you have an idea of what an investment cycle should bring. Now I think you get the basis to then go to other nations and say what type of credit agreements, bringing the real American credit system where you understand money is a means to facilitate this process. This is the real process. This is growth. Mankind creating a fusion economy. That's growth. That's real. That's a real physical change that we want to create. Now we can use credit to facilitate that, to make that happen. The government can use its authority as a sovereign government to take credit, to really take out debt against this future state, to bring this future state into being.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can do that on an international basis.
I think it's just important to reflect that that is our Constitution. We're able to actually do that. These other nations, as of now, don't have that capability, and I think that's to be clear on what we have as a capability that these other nations don't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's throughout the history of our country. I mean, this is what John F. Kennedy tried to do. This is what Franklin Roosevelt did. This is what Lincoln did. This is what this nation was built. You know, all the great leaps in development of this nation were built on that system. And it's a basis of the country. It's the basis of our Constitution. It's what we need to bring back into being now, and it has to be tied to this, like we're discussing, this whole generational, multi-generational development perspective.
Yeah. I think there's two aspects that exist today that Mr. LaRouche himself has raised. Obviously, we have to have a fundamentally advanced science driver program, a fusion program. We have within the American economy today still a quality of genius. It's there. We see it with the curiosity. It was clearly a kind of insight and technology and understanding to be able to participate and create this kind of advanced exploration capability. We've got to advance that. We've got to strengthen it. We've got to create that capacity, because in addition to the role of the credit system, in addition to the role of the political process we play, which is clearly, without that, this world is not going to make it. If the United States doesn't play its historic role, these other countries can't do that. They can bring a lot to bear. As we know, you go to a scientific conference today and half of them are Chinese, because half of the people in attendance, because there's just so many Chinese scientists. There's a broad capability in terms of human resources. Russia has a broad capability both in science as well as in resources. But there's this quality of genius that we have to strengthen, and the fusion driver creates that. But we've also got a question in the United States where we have two real problems we face. One is that our infrastructure and our production capacity has collapsed. This happened with 2005 with the auto sector. Our Westinghouse, General Electric don't really have the production facilities for nuclear power plants as they once did in the United States. So we've got to rebuild our production capacity. That's going to be required for the extensive maglev rail systems, for the power production systems. So we've got to rebuild that. We've got to rebuild our steel plants. We've got to get to 21st century alloy production. And in a broad scale, we're not talking boutique production. The other thing we have is we have a demographic problem. You've got a few people highly skilled in the late 60s and 70s. You've got a trickle down into the 50s. And after that, you have almost nothing. So we've got a generation today that's about 12 or 13 years old. They're in middle school. They've grown up through this post-9/11 period under Bush and Obama. They've got no real sense of an orientation. It's awful. You see the satanic expressions of it. So it's going to take some time, but that generation represents an ability to have within the next 10 to 15 years a complete demographic shift in the workforce of the American population, of the American economy. What we can have within that period of time, we can give a real education towards progress. It's that which governs an education system. It's not, the facts you give someone. It's the commitment to progress, the commitment to discovery. And so within that 10 to 15 year period, these now 12 to 13-year-olds, without really any sense of human identity, can within that time period develop the skills, develop the orientation, get the experience, the kind of apprenticeships. Skilled apprenticeships in the plumbing systems for nuclear power systems and electrical systems. These kinds of skilled labor we used to be known for in the United States, we used to take great pride in. So if we get both of those things converging, while we get this quality of genius that we have still within the American economy going, and we get these two things moving, converging around that quarter mark of this current century, this 2025 area, we can begin to see a full-scale kind of production process really unfold, take traction. And that gives us an outlook towards something like 2050, where we're fusion integrated as an economy, and this Pacific collaboration is now the actual orientation of the global economy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you take, just the immediate thing around, say, our national labs system, our education system, for as problematic as it is and other features at the top edge, is quite still good. It's underfunded and so forth, but I think the other side of this is to take then the older generation and get them working with this younger generation, training the new machinists and the skilled trades and so forth. And then you actually bring the generations together, which right now, as we know, are being pitted against each other.
Mm-hmm.
The kids think that the old people are stealing the Social Security, and why don't they just die off so we can get what's left of the inheritance or something. But then you bring what should be human, the generations back together around a mission. And I think that's the other point, is just what you were going through, is that, because people say, well, this younger generation. Well, frankly, the World War II generation, they grew up as the flappers. They grew up as in a kind of a degenerate cultures in the 20s. But they had this mission in front of them under Roosevelt, mm-hmm. and became the World War II generation because they had leadership and somebody that put this mission before them. And so, I would just say that what we're faced with now is the end of this paradigm that was brought in with Kennedy's death, and a new paradigm can radically transform people's outlook if it's committed to this future and create the kind of optimism and drive to make the kind of breakthroughs that a generation otherwise wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. I think we're talking about redefining a sense of morality for an
mm-hmm.
entire generation. Actually engaging them in a process where they can see that their life actually has a physical contribution to a positive change to the world around them. If you don't have that, then you get this type of decay we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's an imperative to create this morality again, to rebuild this in a generation where they get a sense that they're actually participating in a process in which they are creating something that's going to be there when they're gone. They're actually creating something, a physical state in society that wouldn't be there if they didn't do it. And even after they're gone, is going to continue on. That's real progress. And if you don't have that successive, where each generation is building upon the last, you don't have a healthy society. You don't have a basis for morality, I don't even think. If there's not this real sense that you're actually creating something new, that everybody's participating in the process of creating something new.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us to, I think, the point, which is what this whole package really represents. It's to bring back the real America.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what we're discussing. The whole experiment of this country has been with the idea that it's possible to set up a society based on this idea of consecutive progress, one generation after another. And to the extent we've always embodied that commitment, regardless of all the other problems we've had and all the bad presidents we've had that commitment. And that is the expression of an American credit system. It's that commitment over consecutive generations towards a sense of progress. You can't teach a young person what it means to be an American
mm-hmm.
if that's not a living aspect. And it's that which we bring to the world. That becomes a higher expression of what it means to be human.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Lincoln represents something like that. Well, I think this has been a very good starting point of a discussion process. I think we can look forward to having more of these discussions and continuing to get this kind of policy and this kind of commitment from a growing number of the American people today to become the actual policy of this country and the policy of the world.
To shape the new presidency as Obama goes out.
Which is happening now.
Uh-huh.
So thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks.